Welcome to Sleepy Crimes. I am Anna, your host. Tonight, we drift into the shadows of the Andrea Gail, a ship whose name has become inseparable from the vast, unforgiving memory of the North Atlantic. It is late September, in the year 1991. Imagine yourself standing on the weathered wooden planks of a pier in Gloucester, Massachusetts. The air here is thick, a heavy blanket of salt spray and the scent of old, sun-dried cedar. The morning sun is a pale, hesitant coin pressing through a veil of Atlantic fog, casting long, shifting shadows across the cobblestones of the harbor. Gloucester is a town built on the bones of giants and the spirits of those who never returned from the deep. You can hear the rhythmic, mournful tolling of a distant bell buoy, a lonely metallic chime that vibrates through the soles of your boots. Here, the history of the sea is etched into every rusted anchor and every frayed coil of hemp rope. It is a place of quiet strength and ancient, unspoken fears, where the water is not just a backdrop, but the very pulse of existence. Floating gently against the pier is the Andrea Gail. She is a 72-foot commercial swordfishing vessel, her steel hull painted a sturdy, faded green that has seen the battering of 1,000 waves. Her lines are functional, honest, and heavy. As she rocks in the gentle swells of the harbor, you can hear the low, rhythmic groan of her fenders rubbing against the pilings, a sound like a giant breathing in his sleep. She is being prepared for a long journey, a voyage into the deep blue distance where the sky and the water become one. The crew is busy, their movements slow and deliberate in the morning chill. They are loading 10,000 pounds of bait, frozen, silver-scaled fish that glisten like jewels in the dim light. They carry heavy crates of crushed ice that hiss as they are shoveled into the hold, a cold, crystalline sound that promises to preserve the bounty they hope to find. Miles and miles of monofilament line are coiled in the shadows, along with thousands of steel hooks that catch the stray glints of the rising sun. The ship smells of diesel fuel, hydraulic fluid, and the sharp, metallic tang of the ocean. Captain Frank William Tyne, Jr., known to everyone simply as Billy, stands on the bridge. He is 37 years old, a man whose skin has been cured by the wind, and whose eyes have the steady, distant focus of someone used to looking for a horizon that never arrives. Billy is a man of the sea, a carpenter of waves who has traded the stability of the land for the rhythmic uncertainty of the Grand Banks. He feels the weight of the ship beneath him, the subtle shift in her center of gravity after recent renovations in Florida. She sits a little lower in the water now, a little more somber. Beside him are 5 other men, each driven by their own quiet needs and the magnetic pull of a big paycheck. There is Michael Morin, 36, and Dale Murphy, 30. Both come from the sun-drenched shores of Florida, their skin still holding the warmth of the South, even as the New England autumn begins to bite. They move with the practiced ease of men who know that on a boat, every rope and every latch is a matter of life. There is Alfred Peer and David Sullivan, younger men with the strength of the city in their shoulders, looking toward the open water as a place of both labor and escape. Then there is Robert Shatford, whom everyone calls Bobby. He is 30 years old, a local son of Gloucester. Just a few blocks away sits the Crow's Nest, a tavern where the walls are covered in photographs of men who have gone to sea. Bobby has spent his last few nights there, surrounded by the laughter of friends and the smoky warmth of a familiar room. His farewell to his sister and his girlfriend is bittersweet, a lingering touch of hands before the separation begins. He carries with him the domestic echoes of the land, the memory of a soft bed, the taste of a home-cooked meal, and the lingering sting of a black eye from a final, alcohol-fueled argument. As he steps onto the deck of the Andrea Gail, he leaves the complexities of the shore behind. The ocean offers a different kind of simplicity, a brutal honesty where the only thing that matters is the work and the weather. He feels the vibration of the deck, a low-frequency hum that travels through his shins and into his heart, signaling that the time for talking is over. It is September 20th, 1991. The lines are cast off. You can hear the heavy splash of the thick ropes hitting the water and the wet, slapping sound as they are hauled back onto the deck. The engine surges, a deep, guttural roar that sends a plume of dark smoke into the pale sky. The Andrea Gail begins to move, her bow cutting through the glass-like surface of the inner harbor. Slowly, the town of Gloucester begins to shrink. The man at the wheel's statue, a bronze tribute to thousands of lost souls, watches them pass. The church spires and the colorful houses perched on the rocky hills become small and toy-like. The crew stands on the deck, watching the lighthouse at the end of the breakwater slide past. The water changes color here, shifting from the murky green of the harbor to a deep, bruised purple as the depth increases. The air grows colder, sharper, and the land scent of trees and earth is replaced by the pure, cold vacuum of the open sea. They are heading toward the Grand Banks, a journey of 1,000 miles into the heart of the North Atlantic. The ship is now a small island of steel in a world of water. The rhythmic thrum of the engine is the only heartbeat they will know for the next 40 days. Around them, the horizon stretches out in an infinite, perfect circle, a gray line where the leaden sky meets the restless swells. The men settle into their routines, the familiar clatter of the galley, the checking of the lines, and the quiet observation of the barometer. There is a sense of peace in this departure, a quiet confidence that masks the shadows gathering far to the south and east. For now, the Andrea Gail is just another fishing boat chasing the silver dream of the swordfish. The coastline of Massachusetts has vanished entirely, leaving only the white wake of the ship to mark where they have been. As the light of the first day begins to fade into a deep, indigo twilight, the crew looks forward, unaware that they are sailing toward a convergence of forces that the world will one day call the perfect storm. Close your eyes now and listen to the water against the hull. The journey has begun. The Andrea Gail cuts through the North Atlantic with a steady, grinding determination. Days turn into a blur of gray swells, and the relentless smell of diesel exhaust mixed with the sharp, biting spray of the salt air. To the men on board, the land is no longer a physical reality, but a memory that fades further into the mist with every revolution of the propeller. They are heading toward the Grand Banks, a vast underwater plateau where the cold Labrador current meets the warm fingers of the Gulf Stream. It is a place of perpetual fog and churning nutrients, 1,000 miles from the safety of Gloucester Harbor. The hull, painted a deep forest green, shudders as it climbs the face of a 15-foot wave, momentarily suspended in the cold air before sliding down into the dark valley of the next. Inside the cabin, the crew lives in a space of cramped utility. There is the constant vibration of the 365-horsepower engine, a sound that settles into their bones until it becomes the only silence they know. Billy Tyne watches the radar, the green sweep of the screen a rhythmic pulse in the dim light of the wheelhouse. They are searching for the edge, the invisible boundary where the water temperature shifts and the swordfish gather to feed in the velvet darkness of the deep. The work of a longliner is a grueling ballet of steel and monofilament. As the sun begins to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in bruised shades of violet and orange, the deck becomes a hive of focused activity. The crew prepares the gear. They are not using nets, but a single, continuous line that stretches for 40 miles across the open ocean. Imagine a translucent thread, nearly invisible in the water, carrying thousands of baited hooks into the abyss. The men move with the practiced ease of those who have spent their lives on a shifting floor. They take the bait, 10,000 pounds of frozen squid, and begin the repetitive task of threading it onto the steel circles of the hooks. The squid is cold and rubbery, slick with a film of ice that numbs their fingers. Beside each hook, they snap on a chemical light stick. These small plastic tubes, when cracked, emit a ghostly neon glow of green or blue. In the blackness of the ocean, hundreds of feet below the surface, These flickering lights are the only stars the swordfish will ever see. They bob and weave in the current, mimicking the bioluminescence of the deep-sea creatures the predators hunt. It takes hours to set the line, the monofilament unspooling from the massive drum with a high-pitched whine that competes with the wind. One by one, the hooks disappear into the wake, sinking into the silent, pressurized world below. Once the line is set, a strange, expectant quiet settles over the ship. The men retreat to the galley or their bunks, snatching 3 or 4 hours of fitful sleep while the Andrea Gail drifts alongside the gear. But at the Grand Banks, the luck is thin. The first few hauls bring up only a handful of fish, their silver bodies beautiful but far too few to fill the massive hold. Each time the winch turns, pulling the miles of line back on board, the crew watches the water with narrowed eyes, hoping for the heavy weight of a strike. Instead, they find empty hooks or the occasional shark, its rough skin sandpapering against the steel rail. The frustration is a tangible thing, thick as the fog that blankets the deck. They are 20 days into a trip that was supposed to last 30, and the expenses are mounting. Fuel, food, and ice are not free, and a fisherman only gets paid if the hold is heavy. Billy Tyne makes the decision that many captains fear but few can avoid. They will not turn back for Gloucester with an empty boat. Instead, they will push further east, past the edge of the continental shelf, to the Flemish Cap. It is a remote, lonely stretch of water even further into the North Atlantic, a place where the weather is more volatile and the distance from help is measured in days, not hours. The journey to the Flemish Cap is a transition into a deeper isolation. The water here is a different color, a dark, bruised indigo that seems to swallow the light. But here, the luck changes. As they begin to haul the line under the glow of the deck lights, the first swordfish breaks the surface. It is a magnificent creature, 6 feet of shimmering muscle and a bill like a tapered sword. Its skin is a mosaic of metallic silver and deep charcoal, glistening with the cold moisture of the depths. The crew springs into action. One man manages the line, while another reaches over the rail with a gaff, a long pole with a heavy steel hook. With a coordinated heave, they pull the heavy fish onto the deck. The swordfish thrashes, its tail hammering against the steel plates with a sound like a heartbeat, until it is finally still. This is the silver they have been searching for. The work is relentless. As soon as one fish is dressed and moved to the hold, another appears on the line. They work through the night and into the gray dawn, their muscles screaming with fatigue. The deck is slick with seawater and the metallic scent of the catch. In the hold below, the ice machine hums, burying the fish in a bed of white slush to preserve the quality of the meat. It is a race against time and the elements, and for a few days, it seems they are winning. The hold begins to fill, pound by precious pound. The men are exhausted, their hands swollen from the salt and the constant gripping of the line, but the atmosphere on the ship has shifted. There is the quiet satisfaction of a job being done, the knowledge that this trip will finally provide the paychecks their families need back in Massachusetts. They have nearly 40,000 pounds of fish packed into the ice. But even in this moment of success, the ocean remains a fickle partner. The ice machine, the mechanical heart that keeps their fortune from spoiling, begins to struggle. It makes a new noise, a discordant rattle that suggests a failing bearing or a leak in the coolant. Without ice, the thousands of dollars of swordfish will begin to rot in days, turning their profit into a worthless weight. Billy Tyne watches the weather faxes as they spit out of the machine, the lines of the pressure systems curling across the paper like the whorls of a fingerprint. A large low-pressure system is forming to the west, while a dying hurricane named Grace moves up from the south. For now, the sea is deceptively calm, a vast mirror reflecting the pale light of a low-hanging sun. The crew of the Andrea Gail secures the gear and prepares for the long journey home, unaware that the air they breathe is the calm before a storm that history will never forget. The atmosphere around the Andrea Gale begins to shift in a way that feels heavy, almost sentient. In late October of 1991, the North Atlantic is usually a place of predictable cruelty, but this evening, the air carries a strange, electric tension. The crew, having finally seen success with their heavy hauls of swordfish, finds no comfort in the cooling temperatures. As the sun dips below a horizon that has turned a bruised, metallic purple, the wind begins to hum a different tune through the steel rigging. It is no longer the sharp whistle of a standard autumn breeze. It has become a low, vibrating thrum that resonates deep within the wooden bones of the ship. On the bridge, the barometer, that vital, rhythmic heart of the vessel, begins a slow and agonizing descent. It does not drop with the suddenness of a passing squall, but rather with the steady, inexorable slide of a mountain losing its footing. Each millibar lost is a silent warning, a whisper from the deep that the world above the waves is about to be rewritten. The water beneath the hull, once a familiar enemy, now appears oily and dark, losing its translucent quality and turning into a thick, opaque liquid that swallows the remaining light. There is a stillness that is not peaceful, but rather the breathless pause of a giant drawing in air before a scream. Far to the northwest, a massive cold front is sweeping across the Great Lakes, trailing a veil of frost and gray clouds behind it. It is a wall of polar air, dense and biting, moving with a momentum that seems unstoppable. At the same time, over the Canadian Maritimes, a high-pressure system of near-record proportions is building. This is the Canadian High, a mountain of heavy, stagnant air that weighs down upon the coast with the pressure of 1046 millibars. To a casual observer on land, these might seem like ordinary seasonal shifts, but in the vast theater of the Atlantic, they are the first two players in a deadly choreography. This high-pressure system acts as a granite wall, a stationary force that refuses to budge. As the cold front pushes eastward, it finds its path blocked by this Canadian giant, and the air between them begins to squeeze. This is the birth of the pressure gradient, an invisible vice that starts to accelerate the wind, turning gentle gusts into a relentless, driving force that begins to whip the tops of the swells into white, jagged teeth. The men on the Andrea Gale can feel the temperature dropping, a sudden, sharp cold that cuts through their heavy wool layers and settles deep in their marrow. While the northern systems prepare their assault, a third and more volatile element is climbing upward from the tropics. Hurricane Grace, a Category 2 storm born in the warm, humid cradle near Bermuda, is churning northward. She is a spinning top of tropical energy, carrying the heat of the Caribbean and the moisture of 1,000 storms. As she moves, she pushes massive swells ahead of her, waves that travel for hundreds of miles before they even reach the fishing grounds. These are the long, rolling giants, swells that lift the 72-foot Andrea Gale like a toy, only to drop her into deep, shadowy troughs that feel like the very bottom of the world. Grace is heading directly for the collision point, where the cold front and the Canadian High are already locked in their struggle. The meteorologists on the mainland, watching their satellite screens in Boston and Halifax, begin to see a pattern emerging that defies their charts. It is a rare and terrifying convergence. The warm, moist air of the hurricane is about to be sucked into the cold, dry maw of the northern front. It is a recipe for atmospheric explosion, a process that will transform a standard nor'easter into something far more singular and lethal. The heat of the tropics is the fuel, the cold of the north is the spark, and the high pressure is the containment that forces the energy to build until it has nowhere to go but out and up. In the wheelhouse, Captain Billy Tyne watches the radar and listens to the crackle of the weather facts, but the full scale of the gathering giants remains hidden by the sheer size of the system. Usually, storms in this part of the world follow a predictable path from the southwest to the northeast, eventually blowing themselves out over the empty reaches of the ocean. But this storm is different. It is performing a rare and eerie maneuver known as a retrograde motion. Instead of heading away, it is turning back. It is backing into the coast, curling its fingers around the very waters where the Andrea Gail is trying to make her way home. The realization among the crew is slow, a creeping shadow of concern that grows with every swell that grows larger than the one before it. The sea is no longer a surface. It has become a landscape of moving hills. The waves are now 30 feet high, their crests being blown into a fine, stinging mist that obscures the view from the bridge. The wind, now gusting to 60 miles per hour, begins to shriek through the outriggers with a pitch that sounds almost human. Every joint in the ship groans under the strain, and the smell of salt and diesel is joined by the metallic, ozone scent of a sky that is being torn apart by the clashing air masses. By the evening of October 28th, the convergence is complete. Hurricane Grace has been absorbed, her tropical heart consumed by the massive extratropical cyclone that now straddles the North Atlantic. This is the moment the storm becomes perfect in the most terrifying sense of the word, a flawless alignment of destructive forces. The pressure at the center of the storm has plummeted to 972 millibars, creating a vortex of such power that it begins to draw in everything around it. On the Andrea Gail, the 6 men find themselves in a world where the horizon has vanished. The sky and the sea have merged into a single, churning wall of charcoal gray. Captain Tyne picks up the radio to check in with Linda Greenlaw on the Hannah Bowden, his voice steady, but marked by the weight of the situation. He tells her the weather is coming on strong, reporting 30-foot seas and winds of 80 knots. It is a report of a man who knows he is in a fight, but who still believes his vessel can endure the mounting pressure. He does not yet know that the giants have only just begun to gather their strength. The waves, already taller than houses, are being fed by the immense fetch of the storm, building into rogue monsters that will soon reach 60, 80, and even 100 feet in height. The Andrea Gail is a lone point of steel in a world of water and wind that has forgotten the concept of mercy. The darkness of the night brings no relief, only a heightened sense of the invisible. The crew can hear the ocean more than they can see it, the terrifying roar of 1,000 tons of water collapsing just yards from their hull. The ship's lights struggle to pierce the thick, salt-laden air, reflecting off the white foam that now covers the surface of the sea like a heavy shroud. Inside the cabin, every item not lashed down has become a projectile, and the simple act of standing requires every ounce of strength. They are exhausted, their bodies battered by the constant, violent motion of the boat, yet sleep is impossible. Every time the bow plunges into a wave, there is a sickening moment of weightlessness, followed by a bone-shaking jar as the hull meets the resistance of the water. They are deep within the belly of the beast now, caught in the intersection of 3 separate worlds of weather. The cold from the Great Lakes, the pressure from Canada, and the ghost of a hurricane have combined to create a monster that the Atlantic has not seen in a century. As the Andrea Gail pushes southwest, toward a home that feels further away with every passing minute, the giants continue to tighten their grip, and the sound of the wind rises to a scream that drowns out all hope of silence. The air inside the wheelhouse of the Andrea Gail smells of thick diesel fumes, wet wool, and the bitter dregs of a coffee pot that has been simmering for hours. It is the evening of October 28th, 1991. Outside, the North Atlantic has transformed into a world of chaotic, shifting geometry. The swordfishing boat, a 72-foot steel-hulled vessel, feels smaller with every passing minute as the swells begin to mountain above the stern. Captain Billy Tyne stands at the helm, his boots braced against the slanted floorboards. The ship is heavy, carrying 40,000 pounds of swordfish in its hold, a massive, successful catch that represents a significant payday for the 6 men on board. But that weight, which usually brings a sense of triumph, now feels like a liability. The ice machine, a critical piece of equipment for preserving the harvest, has been failing, forcing a choice between the safety of a slow retreat and the urgency of a direct run home through the gathering gloom. Every time the hull drops into a trough, the groan of the metal resonates through the soles of Billy's feet, a deep, vibrating protest against the immense pressure of the water pressing in from all sides. The green luminescence of the radar screen casts a sickly, rhythmic glow across the cabin, illuminating the maps and the weather faxes that have been spitting out increasingly dire warnings. The wind has begun to find the tiny gaps in the window seals, creating a low-pitched whistle that sounds like a distant, mourning flute, a sound that competes with the rhythmic thrum of the engine and the relentless slap of freezing spray against the glass. Billy leans over the charts, his eyes tracing the coordinates of 44 degrees north and 56.4 degrees west. They are about 162 miles east-northeast of Sable Island, an area known to mariners as the graveyard of the Atlantic. The weather faxes tell a story of an impossible convergence. To the south, Hurricane Grace is churning, pushing tropical moisture upward. To the north, a massive high-pressure system from Canada is driving cold, heavy air downward. And right in the middle, a low-pressure system is developing with terrifying speed. These three giants are beginning to mesh together, their gears interlocking to create a storm of such magnitude that the term nor'easter no longer seems sufficient. In the dim light of the cabin, the white paper of the weather report looks like a ghost. Billy knows the sea, knows its moods and its capacity for sudden, violent shifts, but the numbers on the page are reaching heights he has rarely seen. The wind speed is already gusting to 80 knots, nearly 93 miles per hour. This is no longer just a storm to be weathered. It is a physical barrier, a wall of energy that is moving to intercept them. He reaches for the microphone of the single sideband radio, his fingers tracing the cold, textured plastic. There is a specific weight to the silence in the room just before he keys the mic, a moment where the only sound is the frantic beating of his own heart against the backdrop of the ocean's roar. It is approximately 6 o'clock in the evening when the radio crackles to life, the static hissing like steam. Billy is calling out to the Hannah Bowden, the Andrea Gail's sister ship. On the other end of the transmission is Linda Greenlaw, an experienced captain and a friend who is fishing some distance away. The conversation is professional, grounded in the shared language of those who make their living on the water, but there is an underlying tension that vibrates through the airwaves. Linda asks for a weather report. Billy wants a fishing report. It is a brief exchange, a reaching out across the dark, violent expanse that separates them. Billy describes the conditions with a calm that belies the reality outside the windows. He mentions the 30-foot seas, waves the size of 3-story buildings that are now regularly washing over the deck, burying the equipment in foam and freezing brine. He tells her the weather is bad, very bad. There is no mention of a mayday, no frantic plea for help. There is only the steady, stoic reporting of a man who believes his ship can take what is coming. As the conversation nears its end, Billy utters the words that will be remembered for decades, a final transmission that seems to hang in the air long after the radio goes silent. He tells the fleet, "She is coming on, boys, and she is coming on strong." The sound of his voice is steady, but the static around it seems to thicken, a digital fog that is beginning to swallow the last threads of connection to the world of the living. As the sun disappears entirely, leaving the Andrea Gail in a void of ink and white foam, the 30-foot seas begin to grow. The transition is subtle at first, a lengthening of the swell, a deeper drop into the darkness. But soon the waves are no longer mere swells, they are moving cliffs. In the North Atlantic, when a storm of this magnitude hits the shallow waters near the banks, the waves don't just get higher, they become steep and unstable. The boat begins to pitch at angles that defy gravity, the heavy swordfish in the hold shifting slightly, a dull thud that can be felt in the very marrow of the crew's bones. The wind has climbed past 90 miles per hour, turning the sea spray into horizontal needles that scour the paint from the steel hull. Outside the wheelhouse, the world is a screaming, lightless horizontal plain of water and air. The crew, Bobby, Murph, Sully, Bugsy, and Alfred, are likely braced in their bunks or huddled in the galley, listening to the terrifying symphony of the storm. They can hear the waves striking the side of the boat with the force of a car crash, the steel plates vibrating under the impact. The engine continues to thrum, a mechanical heartbeat that is the only thing keeping them pointed into the wind. If the engine fails, if the boat turns broadside to these waves, it will be over in seconds. Billy grips the wheel, his knuckles white, staring into the blackness where the horizon used to be. He is looking for the crests, waiting for the next massive wall of water to rise out of the dark and challenge the 72 feet of metal that is their only sanctuary. The minutes after 6 o'clock become an eternity of endurance. The radio remains on, but the silence coming from the Andrea Gail is absolute. Back on land, and on the other ships in the fleet, the lack of communication isn't immediately seen as a death knell. Radios fail in storms, antennas are snapped off by the wind, power is lost. But out in the heart of the convergence, the Andrea Gail is facing the impossible. Somewhere in the darkness, a wave larger than the rest, a rogue wave born from the constructive interference of 3 different storm systems, is beginning to take shape. It is a wall of water that might reach 60, 80, or even 100 feet in height. To the men on board, it would have appeared not as a wave, but as the world itself rising up to meet them. The emergency beacon, the device meant to signal their location to the Coast Guard in the event of a disaster, sits in its bracket, its switch remaining in the off position. Perhaps the end came too quickly for a hand to reach it, or perhaps the power of the ocean was so absolute that the mechanical systems simply ceased to function. By midnight, the last known position of the ship, 180 miles northeast of Sable Island, is a patch of ocean that holds no light and no sound other than the roar of the wind. The final transmission has faded into the archives of the coast, leaving only the memory of Billy Tyne's voice and the terrifying promise of the storm that came on strong. The ocean, vast and indifferent, continues its heavy work, erasing the wake of the vessel as if it had never been there at all. The air inside the search and rescue coordination centers is thick, a heavy mixture of scorched coffee, the metallic scent of overheated electronics, and the frantic static of 1,000 frequency bands. It is October 31st, 1991. Outside these walls, the world is being dismantled by a cascade of salt and wind, but inside, the maps are laid flat, pinned down by hands that have grown cold with the realization that the Andrea Gail is more than just late. The official search begins at the absolute height of a tempest that the world will soon call the perfect storm. Imagine the pilots of the P-3 Orion aircraft, strapped into seats that vibrate with the rhythmic, agonizing groan of metal fighting against a 100-mile-per-hour headwind. They are low, dangerously so, skimming the peaks of waves that have ceased to be mere water. From the cockpit, these are moving mountains of black glass, tipped with jagged white foam that looks like shattered bone. The ocean does not look liquid. It looks like a battlefield of shadow and sound, a landscape where the horizon is constantly stolen by walls of spray. Every time the aircraft dips into a trough, the pilots lose their bearings for a heartbeat, seeing nothing but a gray, shifting void that seems to swallow the very light of the sun. Down on the surface, the Coast Guard cutters struggle against a sea that has forgotten how to be calm. The water is a freezing 46 degrees, a temperature that steals the breath from a man's lungs and numbs the soul in a matter of minutes. These ships, massive and built of hardened iron, are tossed like hollow corks in a child's bath. Sailors hold tight to cold, slick steel railings, their knuckles turning a ghostly white against the dark metal. Their eyes sting from the salt that crusts on their lashes, a fine, biting powder that turns every blink into a chore. There is a sickening lurch with every roll of the hull, a deep, resonant thud as the bow slams into a wall of water, sending a shudder through the very bones of the crew. They are guests in a realm that has grown violently hostile, searching across an expanse of 109,000 square miles of liquid chaos. From the Grand Banks down toward the treacherous, shallow shoals of Cape Cod, they scan the whitecaps for anything that looks man-made. They are looking for a speck of yellow, a glint of steel, or a flare of red against the monochromatic fury, but all they find is the endless, screaming wind. As the calendar turns toward the first days of November, the storm begins to exhale its final, ragged breaths, leaving behind a world that has been broken and rearranged. The focus of the search shifts toward a narrow, crescent-shaped sliver of land known as Sable Island. It is a place composed of shifting sand and the ribs of old shipwrecks, often whispered about in Gloucester as the graveyard of the Atlantic. Here, the icy currents of the Labrador and the warm pulse of the Gulf Stream meet in a permanent, churning embrace, dragging anything that floats toward these lonely, windswept shores. On November 5th, the searchers find the first physical echoes of the Andrea Gail. The sand of Sable Island is fine and pale, but today it is littered with the heavy refuse of the deep. A propane tank, rusted and scarred by the salt, lies partially buried in the dunes, its surface scoured smooth by the wind. Nearby, a fishing net beacon rolls lazily in the surf, a hollow piece of plastic that once signaled a successful catch. The silence on the island is heavy and absolute, broken only by the mournful cry of gulls and the rhythmic, hollow thud of waves that have traveled 1,000 miles just to die upon this sand. Then, amongst the tangled seaweed and the driftwood, they find the beacon. The emergency position indicating radio beacon, the EPIRB, is discovered on the southwest corner of the island. It is a small device, no larger than a bowling pin, designed to be the crew's final, desperate voice when all other radios have gone dark. It is engineered to float free if a ship sinks, automatically triggering a signal that reaches up to the satellites to cry out for rescue. But as the Canadian Coast Guard officers lift it from the wet sand, their hearts sink into their chests. The switch is in the off position. This silent machine, which should have been screaming the vessel's location to the heavens, is mute. It has drifted through the heart of the greatest storm of the century without ever being armed. It is a chilling discovery that hangs in the air like a fog. It suggests a moment of such sudden, overwhelming violence that no hand could reach for the switch, or perhaps a moment of such total chaos that the simple act of turning it on was lost in the desperate struggle to stay upright. The beacon is cold and indifferent in their hands, a piece of plastic carrying the silent weight of 6 missing men. The discoveries do not end with the silent beacon. Further along the jagged shoreline, the searchers come across a life raft. It is yellow and bright, a jarring contrast to the gray Atlantic, but it is entirely empty. The fabric is shredded in places, stained by the brine and the oil of the sea, yet the name is still clearly legible, stenciled in bold, black letters, Andrea Gail. This raft was the crew's last sanctuary, their only hope if the hull were to split or the deck were to vanish beneath them. To see it here, washed up on the sand and devoid of any life, is to understand the absolute finality of the ocean. There are no survival suits found inside. There are no signs of a struggle to stay aboard, no marks of human passage. It is merely flotsam, a shell of safety that arrived at the shore too late or was never reached at all. The searchers walk the length of the beach with heavy steps, their boots sinking deep into the wet, packed sand, looking for anything else, a glove, a boot, a scrap of clothing. But the ocean is selective in what it returns. It gives back the steel tanks and the plastic beacons, the things that cannot feel the cold, while it keeps the rest for itself in the deep. By November 9th, the search is officially suspended. The mathematics of survival in the 46-degree water have reached their inevitable conclusion, and the probability of life has dropped to 0. The planes returned to their hangars, their engines cooling with a series of rhythmic, metallic ticks that sound like clocks winding down. The cutters turned their bows back toward the mainland, leaving the Grand Banks to the fog and the memory of the gale. 186,000 square nautical miles have been searched, an area larger than many countries, and all that remains are those few hollow items on the sand of Sable Island. The families in Gloucester wait by their windows, watching the tide come in and go out, hoping for a miracle that the Coast Guard can no longer promise. The case of the Andrea Gail transitions now, moving from a rescue mission to a haunting mystery, a story written in the currents and the deep, silent trenches of the Atlantic floor. The physical search has ended, but for those left behind in the quiet of the harbor, the long, echoing silence is only just beginning. The wind over Gloucester Harbor has a specific, heavy quality in the wake of a nor'easter. It carries the scent of brine and the cold, metallic promise of winter. By the middle of November 1991, the frantic energy of the search had finally, quietly, dissolved into a hollow silence. The planes had returned to their hangars, the cutters had docked, and the vast, gray Atlantic remained as indifferent as it had been when the first wave struck. In the town, the air felt thick with a shared, unspoken grief. It was the kind of stillness that only exists in a place where the sea is both a provider and a grave. You can hear it in the rhythmic clinking of metal rigging against masts in the marina, a lonely, repetitive sound that punctuates the fog. The water here is deep green, almost black, and it laps against the weathered wooden pilings of the docks with a soft, sucking sound, as if it is trying to pull the land itself into the depths. The people of Gloucester walked with their collars turned up against the damp, their eyes frequently drifting toward the horizon, searching for a ghost ship that would never crest the waves. Standing sentinel over this quiet harbor is the man at the wheel. It is an 8-foot-tall bronze figure, greened by decades of salt spray and history. Sculpted by Leonard Krask in 1925, the fisherman stands with his hands gripped white-knuckled on a pilot's wheel, his body leaning into a permanent, invisible gale. His eyes are fixed on the distance, forever watching for the rocks that have claimed so many. At the base of the granite pedestal, the words of the 107th Psalm are carved into the stone, they that go down to the sea in ships. Beneath those words, the years are listed, 1623 to 1923. It was meant to honor the thousands of men lost in the 3 centuries before its dedication, but in the autumn of 1991, the space around the monument became a sanctuary for a new kind of sorrow. Families gathered there, leaving small tokens, faded photographs, salt-stained caps, and bouquets of flowers that the wind would slowly pull apart. The bronze man at the wheel didn't flinch. He remained steady, a reminder that in this town, the sea has always demanded a heavy price for its bounty. On a gray morning in early November, more than 1,000 people moved like a slow, dark tide toward St. Anne's Church. The building is a massive, stone structure, its bells tolling with a low, resonant frequency that seemed to vibrate in the very marrow of the mourners' bones. Inside, the air was warm and heavy with the scent of beeswax candles and damp wool. There were no caskets. In a fishing town, the most painful funerals are the ones where the earth remains empty. The pews were packed with men in flannel shirts and women with tired, red-rimmed eyes. They came to say goodbye to 6 names that had become synonymous with the power of the storm. Frank William Tyne Jr., known to everyone as Billy. Robert Shatford, whom his friends called Bobby. Dale Murphy, Michael Moran, David Sullivan, and Alfred Peer. The priest's voice was a soft drone against the vast silence of the congregation. He spoke of the sea's mystery and the courage of those who work upon it. But for the families sitting in the front rows, the words were likely just a background to the memories of laughter at the crow's nest or the sound of a heavy boot on a kitchen floor. Ethel Shatford, a woman whose face was a map of Gloucester's resilience, continued to work at the crow's nest. The bar is a dim, wood-paneled space where the air smells of stale beer and old stories. For months after the Andrea Gail vanished, the atmosphere in the bar was different. It wasn't just a place to drink, it was a waiting room. People would sit for hours, staring at the television or the door, as if the sheer weight of their collective will could bring the crew back through the entrance. They spoke of the 72-foot vessel as if she were still out there, perhaps just beyond the reach of the radio, her hold full of swordfish and her lights cutting through the fog. But as the weeks turned into months, the talk shifted from rescue to legacy. The names of the 6 men were eventually etched into the bronze plaques near the memorial, joining the 10,000 others who had vanished since the town was founded. Each name is a story cut short, a dinner left cold, a promise of a return that the Atlantic decided not to honor. The names are small, just letters in metal, but they carry the weight of entire lives. The ocean has a way of smoothing over its own history. The waves that rose 100 feet high during the Halloween gale eventually settled into the gentle, rhythmic swells of a calm summer day. The debris from the Andrea Gail, the fuel tanks, the empty life raft, the emergency beacon that washed up on the sands of Sable Island, was collected and catalogued, then hidden away in the archives of tragedy. There is a haunting beauty in the mystery that remains. Because the boat was never found, because the crew never returned to the earth, they belong forever to the water. They are part of the tide now, part of the deep, cold currents that flow across the Flemish Cap and the Grand Banks. In the quiet moments before dawn, when the harbor is shrouded in a thick white mist, you can almost imagine the low thrum of an engine and the ghostly shape of a green hull moving silently toward the dock. The sea keeps its secrets well, tucked away in the darkness of the continental shelf, where the pressure is immense and the silence is absolute. The Andrea Gail is no longer a ship of wood and steel. She is a legend of the North Atlantic. As the years pass, the story of the 1991 storm continues to be told, a cautionary tale of nature's indifferent power. But in Gloucester, it is more than a story. It is a presence. It is the salt on the skin and the wind in the rigging. It is the way the town gathers every year to lay wreaths upon the water, watching the petals drift away until they are swallowed by the foam. We leave the crew of the Andrea Gail there, in the vast and restless cradle of the deep. They are at peace now, far below the reach of the wind and the crashing of the waves. The lights of the harbor are dimming, the fog is rolling in, and the world is growing still. You can let go of the details now. The story has reached its end and the water is calm. The case rests now. Let the details fade. You are safe. Close your eyes, breathe deeply, and have a good night. Sleep well.